Welcome to the first edition of the Talking National League podcast. It is finally here. For viewers watching, probably the more regular viewers from past podcasts, you probably well know me for being an FC Halifax Town fan. Now, from now on, I'm going to be covering the National League from every Thursday at 7 p.m, bringing special guests on, talking about the National League, doing game week predictions and reviews and things like that. So at this moment in time, it is pre-season. There's a lot of transfers going around. That is something we are going to be looking into tonight. We're also going to be looking into some of the latest odds within the National League on who are going to win promotion next season. But before we do that, we're going to be reviewing the playoffs that have obviously most recently gone. Without any further ado, let's do that. So on tonight's podcast, I've brought on two guests. I've brought on Colin, who's a Notts County fan from Analyst Bar, and I've also brought on Tom Fierney, who's well known for doing National League and National League North and South coverage on Twitter. So without any further ado, let's look at the highlights from last time.
Fixture that is brilliantly brutal, as pressurised as they come. We could see a first Football League promotion or an immediate return to that particular promised land. And in time we go, Dallas with Hudlin waiting in the middle. Smith had to be careful there. Sabara stands it up. Hudlin! What a great header! The big man with a huge goal for Solihull. Inviting pressure, and they're in here. Nakati! What a roar from the Mariners! It's going to be extra time. Abrahams is in there. Diaz-Saroué is in there. It's flicked on towards the back post and turned in! Maguire Drew was there! And he might just have got the goal that sends Grimsby back to the football. It's one of Grimsby's great days! Paul Hurst done it again!
So lads, cheers for joining me tonight. How are we both doing?
I'm really good, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Yeah, not too bad at all, mate.
Good. I appreciate you both coming on. Obviously, for the viewers, go follow Tom Fierney on Twitter and also Colin and Analyst Bar on Twitter too. So I'll start with you then, Colin. Obviously not the best for both of us to still be in the National League, but at least you get to come on podcasts like this, would you say?
Absolutely. Every silver lining, isn't it? Yeah. And like I say, it's never a dull moment in National League, is it? So we're ready for another roller coaster season, I'm sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's quite a lot to talk about tonight. Thomas, I know you keep up to date with the National League regularly. You're well known on Twitter. What were your thoughts on the playoffs?
I think it was just an incredible playoff campaign. You know, pretty much every game really delivered. And, you know, I mean, that Wrexham-Grimsby Town match was just... It literally was. If you stayed away for 20 seconds, you'd miss something. Just really highlighted what a fantastic division it is, the National League.
Yeah. Colin, what were your thoughts then on the playoff final? We will talk a bit about Notts County and their playoff campaign too, but what were your thoughts?
Yeah, once the tears had dried, obviously, from our campaign finishing, it was just a fantastic spectacle, wasn't it? And two very different stories going head to head, really. You know, you've got club in Wrexham that everybody probably assumed that was going to go through and didn't. Do you know what I mean? And so therefore you've got Grimsby who were going in there as the outliers, you know, the team that came in on the rails at the end. And then Solihull who were always sort of there and thereabouts, weren't they? So you had all these kind of different narratives clashing and coming together, which again leads to the fantastic story that is the National League. And it's quite hard to have those kind of takeaways as well. You know, you start looking about your own club and starting thinking, right, what can we learn from that? What can we take away? And yet there was so many different ways to do it and so many different ways to get into the final. And ultimately, you know, Grimsby going up, you know, via the playoffs. There were so many different narratives that I'll be honest with you, it's sort of, I'm still trying to piece it together in terms of hoping for positive signs for Notts and, you know, hopefully being what feels like 100 times lucky now, you know, maybe we'll do it this time.
There's so much unpredictability with the playoffs. Like, firstly, I think everyone thinking, you know what, Wrexham, they're going to be the out-and-out favourites heading into the playoffs. They finished second in the league. You know, Wrexham and Stockport, I think we can all agree, were the two best sides in the division over the course of the season, as was proven with the league table. But like them getting, like even Notts County, Grimsby, I think everyone was probably thinking, oh, Notts County, I'll probably edge for them to win. Same with Halifax Chesterfield. I think everyone were edging Halifax. But I think every game had unpredictability. I think the only game where I sort of thought, yeah, they're definitely going to win was Solihull versus Chesterfield. And that was the only one that planned out well. Like, I don't know if you guys did National League predictions to yourselves or on Twitter, but my predictions didn't come off too well, which it usually doesn't, does it, within the Vanarama National League? But yeah, the likes of Grimsby defeating Wrexham, just what a game that was. It was, every throw-in was like a penalty, and every corner was like a penalty. 9 goals in that game. And yeah, it just shows how the National League can deliver with games like that. What a spectacle. And then even the final, like a 2-1 win, obviously, for Grimsby. But I think still Solihull were probably the slight favourites as a neutral heading into that game when you look at how strong Solihull have been towards the end of the season. Going into like the final and after Grimsby had defeated Wrexham and Solihull had defeated Chesterfield, who were your favourites to win in that game? Colin, I'll start with you.
Having seen Grimsby up close and seeing just how aggressive they were at pressing, the energy levels that they got, I sort of was favouring Grimsby. I have to say there was probably a little bit of bias there as well. I know there was a lot of Notts fans that were supporting Solihull because of Neil Ardley. And what that had actually done on Notts Twitter was create almost a kind of rivalry within the fan base of those who didn't want Neil Ardley to be sacked when he was last season, and Ian Birchnell as well. So there was this kind of rivalry that, frankly, I was just worried that narrative was going to run and run if Neil Ardley was able to get Solihull over the line. But saying that, I mean, the horse I had in the race was, and part of Analyst Bar, one of the things that we do is we do a bit of talent identification, look at data, those sort of things. And a player that stood out for me was Ben Fox, who was probably the player of the playoffs, really, from thinking about the game against Notts and then the role that he played at Wrexham, and then obviously the performance he put in the final as well. So I'd recommended him as a player that I wish Notts had signed, after his release from Burton, and what a playoff campaign he had. So I was interested in seeing that, and I was delighted to ultimately see him be successful.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, what was your thoughts then going into the final?
Well, I did think Grimsby would be the team that would do it, kind of just with the momentum they had after that Wrexham game. And one player that had really stood out for me was John McAtee, and I know just how much Paul Hurst had kind of really pushed for the side to get him in, and he really has delivered some really crucial goals, and he's a player that I'd be stunned if he ever is in non-league again, because his reputation, he's had a fantastic season. He will have a good season in League Two if he stays at Grimsby Town. I think he will, but there'll certainly be 1 or 2 clubs who will be looking at a player like him, because at such a big stage, he kept delivering.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we've had a few people coming in the chat giving their thoughts on the playoffs and transfers, etc. For viewers watching, you are free to get involved with the chat, give your predictions for next season. We're going to be talking more on the playoffs and transfer news heading into tonight's episode. So yeah, it was very unpredictable, the playoffs. Grimsby Town, credit to you for getting promoted. Also to Stockport County. To be honest, I didn't expect Grimsby to get promoted. It's quite sad to see Grimsby go, because we've got friends over in Grimsby too. But yeah, it is so unpredictable, isn't it, this league?
It really is. And like I say, different ways of doing it as well. That's what we saw going into the playoffs. Lots of different sort of approaches. Obviously, we've got Notts, and that's what's led me into the kind of data and analysis thing, thinking about the owners and the approach they make and their sort of transfer policy. And then you've got the kind of really sort of, Wrexham going out for absolute glory, spending huge amounts of money on players. You've got Stockport, who had a huge turnover of players, not necessarily paying fees like Wrexham did, but they were brave enough to make managerial changes as well as player changes, which, ordinarily you'd think perhaps that's not the right way to do it, is change it after, November, December time, but that's worked out incredibly well for them. And then you've got Grimsby, which is another sort of fantastic story that and I mean, no disrespect to Grimsby, but they never felt anywhere near it really. And it really shows as well that, as long as you've got that momentum and stamina and you believe in yourselves, and despite the fact that there's plenty of clubs out there, including Notts, that rely on sort of individual talent and individual standout players, there's also space in the National League to be successful with those traditional things, set pieces, long throw-ins, teams that are galvanised, teams that work on momentum and stuff. So yeah, absolutely fantastic advert for the National League.
Yeah, that was quite a popular trait, wasn't it, in the playoffs, the long throw-in. We saw it in many games, including obviously the Grimsby versus Wrexham game. Even the final, we saw it with Grimsby. We've also seen it against Grimsby versus Notts County. Sum up Notts County's playoffs campaign, then obviously it was quite a bit of a letdown, and probably assumed from your point of view when you're heading into the playoffs. What were your thoughts on the playoffs from a Notts County's point of view?
Well, I think we've used the word once or twice already, and that was momentum. And you need that going forward, don't you? And you need to sort of feed off that. And I think we saw Grimsby do that to great effect. And although Notts going into the playoffs had stabilised, we had players coming back, we were keeping clean sheets, which always gives you confidence. There was always that question mark over Notts. And I remember us doing a previous podcast where we had all the representatives of all the clubs, and I think when you watch your own club, you're aware of its shortcomings. And let's face it, clubs in the National League are always going to have some kind of shortcoming that they've got to overcome or get around. And Notts, it was kind of slightly defensive frailty. The way that we attack, and we attack often, and we use attack as almost like the best form of defence, but it leaves us wide open. And unfortunately, we saw that come to fruition, in Grimsby. And I remember us talking also on the podcast, and I think this is again very relevant for events that are happening off the field now. It also felt for Notts that we were on the cusp of something, in the sense that we'd had players who were probably the last roll of the dice. So we've just seen Kyle Wootton leave, for example, to Stockport today. Knowing he was out of contract, we needed to go up in order to retain him, I think. And obviously that hasn't happened, and he's moved on since, and very good luck to him. We've also got players like Ruben Rodriguez and Cal Roberts, who thankfully are under contract, but don't really have anything really to prove in the National League, and I'll be surprised if we retain them. Obviously delighted as well, but surprised if we retain them. So it felt like this was as good as it was going to get with this group of players, and it feels like we might be experiencing a bit of turnover. But I suppose going back to what I was originally saying, the Stockport story reassures us that if there is a big turnover, and we are going to have a new manager, or head coach, should I say, and we are going to have new players, the Stockport story at least reassures us that can still end in success.
Yeah, certainly. We're going to look into a lot of details on Notts County and a few of the big clubs within the National League heading into next season. We're going to also talk a little about the National League North and South on the sides who got promoted. We've got loads of videos in the future on them too. But firstly, Colin, I know you sent me this statistic in from last season. It interested me when I first saw it, and this is for viewers also watching. You can also take this in. Colin, could you talk us through this?
Yeah, so myself and Richard Gando, who does Not Stats, and you can see his logo in the bottom right-hand corner there. We like to look at the statistical analysis. This is taken from Y-Scout data. And what we wanted to look at really was some of the trends from the National League. And we were particularly interested as Notts fans, as I'm sure you can imagine, about offensive action. So this idea of attacking and which clubs, really sort of go for it and those sort of things. And obviously Notts County are at the top, which is a bit of a kind of an empty victory, really. Sadly, there's no promotion spaces for being top of the offensive actions table. But it tells you a story within itself. This is how Notts played. This is Notts' approach, but also it was our downfall as well, because again, this relentless attacking approach unfortunately exposed us more often than not to the counter attack. And like I said, we saw that probably most significantly in the Grimsby game. But also, it shows you the other club's approach as well. And I don't want anybody from any other club to look at their name being fourth, fifth, I don't know, down the list and see that as some sort of negative reflection, because Notts may have made the most offensive action, so most touches in the penalty box being one of the metrics, but we weren't as effective as other clubs who were perhaps lower down the list. We didn't outscore every club in the National League. So whereas we made these actions, these movements, these attacking gestures towards the goal, it didn't do us any good, really. You can see that Stockport are high up there, and obviously it did. There might also be some interesting standout clubs. Dagenham and Redbridge, for example, really, really good attacking unit, and it'd be interesting to see how that changes. But then also, we look at another successful club in terms of Grimsby, that they're not exactly in the upper echelons, and it tells you how they were able to be successful. That yes, okay, they probably had less offensive actions, put their chances away, were also defensively resilient as well. And I think the league average line is also quite an interesting tell, really, something to look at. And it'd be interesting when we talk about transfers and recruitment, how a club's going to go about addressing this. You'd imagine that the clubs at the lower end are probably wanting to address the fact that they haven't got these offensive actions, and it doesn't necessarily have to just be a striker. Where's the player who's going to play the ball through? Where's the player who's going to play through the lines? So that's perhaps, recruitment wise worth looking at for these players lower down the list. And then also, like I say, those who were really attacking but weren't successful, maybe they need to start looking at other areas.
I think what interests me is some of the clubs lower down. Like you look at the likes of Boreham Wood, and although they finished quite low down the league by the end of the season, you think of initially where they finished in the league, I think just above mid-table, pondering around the players for the majority of the season. It's quite phenomenal that you see them so low down. But yeah, it just shows you how a club who doesn't create too many attacks can, cause problems on the counter-attack and take their chances, which Boreham Wood clearly did, didn't they?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned Boreham Wood, because Luke Gerrard's name was a name that was mentioned as a possible replacement online on Twitter, as fans obviously getting involved in that, recognising the progress that Boreham Wood had made. Whereas you can see that, tactically anyway, or certainly in terms of approach, and I know that there's a wider context in terms of the squad available and the budget available, but you could see that he probably wouldn't be as good a fit as someone like McMahon, for example, Dagenham and Redbridge, for example, who is able to kind of demonstrate and be able to put a side together that can be attacking, and so would be able to take over the reins of Ian Birchnell at Notts County, for example. So I think this stat's also quite useful when you're looking at kind of managers to being able to kind of continue approaches from this current season.
Mm-hmm. Tom, what do you take from this statistic then heading into next season?
I think it's very interesting, first of all, and it's that whole thing of, I look at someone like Gary Johnson, Torquay United, who obviously were, there was a little period of time where it looked like they might have been that team that could sneak into the playoffs with momentum. They obviously had quite a difficult start to the season, and then it all kind of picked up a little bit. But, again, you're looking at next season and kind of that ethos being carried out. The likes of Dagenham, Red and Torquay could be two sides with the right recruitment. If they can continue in this manner, that they could be teams that we're looking out at.
Yeah, certainly. We'll move on from that. Now, I do want to talk a bit about Notts County in particular. When you think of Notts County heading into next season, it's quite an interesting changeover, isn't it, with the managerial change? We're talking about my own club too, FC Halifax Town, and talking a bit about some of the managerial changes. So firstly, I want to talk about the Ian Birchall situation. Obviously, he's left to go and pursue his future in the Football League with Forest Green Rovers. Colin, who would be the ideal replacement for you?
I think one of the things that's quite interesting with Notts is the way that the club runs, and in no way are we unique with this. But I think whoever's got to come in has got to accept that there's a recruitment team that's already established that was recruiting players for Ian Birchnell and was also very active under Neil Ardley as well. So whoever comes in has got to be able to accept that dynamic and be able to work alongside that dynamic. So that rules out the kind of traditional managers that we would expect, those that come in and expect to have complete control, expect to be able to bring in their own scouting teams and those sort of things. And I'll be honest with you, as a Notts County fan, as a long-standing Notts County fan, I want that to happen. I want Notts to continue with that model, because we have changed approach so many times, and it's not just subtle approaches as well. We have had wild swings of approaches, from
Have we cut out? I think we may have had. We've had a bit of a technical difficulty. Colin, you try to sort out your internet. So, Tom, I'll come to you then. Who do you think would be the perfect manager for Notts County?
Well, I think first of all, it's really interesting how they're going about this, because there are certain names which are maybe they're being put forward, maybe they're, it's going out into the public domain that they're not, maybe forthcoming for the job, but the names that they're going for clearly are ones that play, good attacking football, have a good policy in terms of their recruitment, and maybe, as Colin was saying, in terms of being able and willing to maybe listen to people and say, right, you're recommending this player, that's something that we're going to accept. The signing of Macaulay Langstaff is a fantastic deal for Notts County. There was, I think I can say this, and it isn't too, that there was a release clause in his deal. It was a release clause that I know one other club had at least looked at whether they were going to activate it, and maybe Notts County were able to kind of steal a march there and get, they paid the fee, they get the player, but the managers that they are looking at right now, in terms of the ones that maybe they've not forthcoming to take the role, I think there is a lot of optimism with the managers that they're being linked to and the managers that have said no, because it does show that philosophy is clearly being looked at.
Yeah. I know we've had an Altrincham fan come in the chat, and obviously there's been a lot of connection between Altrincham and Notts County at this moment in time with Phil Parkinson, who's obviously set his future with Altrincham FC. But up until recently, Notts County, there's been a lot of rumours about him being the potential new Notts County manager. Colin, are you a little bit disappointed about Phil Parkinson committing his future with Altrincham? Would you like to have seen him manage Notts County?
I mean, to be honest, having seen Ian Birchnell walk away from quite a big project at Notts, I'm actually quite relieved that there are some managers, that they're quite willing to see a project out, and it seems like he's incredibly engaged and excited by that project. So I've only got respect for him to want to be able to continue that and to continue the fantastic work that he's been able to do. So no, I wouldn't say necessarily that I was gutted, because I think, like I say, on a kind of professional level, he's done a fantastic thing there. I think also as well, and I'm not sort of denying that there wasn't Notts interest, but I think one of the things that's really common as a Notts fan, because of the way that we recruit and because of the way that we do things in, shall we say, quite a quiet and quite an alternative manner to, shall we say, previous owners that we might have had, that we never really know who's the favourite. If we think back to the Ian Birchnell recruitment, he was never the favourite up until the moment that the door opened and the cameras flashed and he turned up. So I'm not saying at all that Notts weren't interested. I think there was enough noise around it, and obviously the statement that Altrincham has made makes it very clear. I think their original tweet before they deleted it made it incredibly clear that there was interest from Notts County. But at the same time, I'm more than reassured that the owners have got plenty of options, and that's not to discredit the Altrincham manager at all, but plenty of options. I'd imagine quite a few alternative choices than shall we say, the traditional managers. And like I say, so I'm not too worried, if I'm honest with you, in terms of what's going in. But like I say, wasn't too sure how much you managed to catch me before I was cut off. But the point I was making is that whoever comes in has got to accept the model that's already established, and so therefore I am more reassured, because we're not going to be wholly reliant on whoever comes in to completely bring everything in and to almost start from scratch again. They're building on top of some fairly solid foundations. I just feel that we need to be a little bit more stronger defensively. We possibly need to be able to recruit a few more options, and we're probably going to end up attacking in a slightly different way when you consider Wotton, maybe Rodriguez, maybe Roberts.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that same style will be implemented with Notts County, of trying to keep the ball, frustrate the opposition, don't let them near the ball, and just keep attacking momentumly, just attacking with literally no thought defensively on just trying to outscore the opposition? Do you think that style of play is going to be implemented going into next season under the new manager?
I think there are some really established expectations that Notts are going to be a side that is confident on the ball, has the ball, and we've recruited players who are under contract this season who have been selected for those skills. I mean, if we think about, we've renewed the contract of Richard Brinney, which I'm delighted about. He's a fantastic player, plays on the right hand side. But the comments around that, the narrative around that was about his ability on the ball, about he's an attacking wide centre back as well as being able to play at right back. So I don't think there's going to be a massive change. However, and the statement when Ian Birchnell left made it very clear that the new manager will be able to bring in some of their own qualities. And obviously, as a fan who's watched the playoffs slip out of our grasp and has had plenty of games where I would really like us to be a little bit more in control, a little bit more robust away from home. I'm hopeful that we are going to be bringing in a head coach who can add some of those elements as well to what is, don't get me wrong, a fantastic thing to watch, provided that we win. So like I say, I think there'll be, coming down to Medellin and watching Notts away, it'll be a very similar style of play. I just hope that we can tighten it up a little bit as well.
Yeah. Tom, who would you like to have seen as the new Notts County manager? Would you have liked to have seen Phil Parkinson?
Well, I think Phil Parkinson, deserves a lot of credit for what he has achieved, as well at Nantwich Town as well. And, when he was at Nantwich, there was a lot of interest in him, and he kind of said, no, I'm going to see this out. And he did that. And he goes to Altrincham, they go full time. They've signed 4 players that basically are all players that Phil Parkinson had identified in the previous months. Baines from Chorley. I'll be honest, I was absolutely stunned he wasn't going into the Football League, because he has so many qualities that, would do very well, at a couple of teams, I could name in League Two and 1 or 2 in League One as well. So, I think that's the big thing here, is that Phil Parkinson deserves a lot of credit for kind of, he's been back to they're going full time, and he's gone, do you know what? You've given me all that. I'm going to repay that and kind of stick at it, because, I think with some managers, they're always looking out for that next opportunity. And Phil Parkinson has never struck me as that manager, who fits into that mould.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to talk a bit about Altrincham FC then. Obviously, they've gone full-time into that full-time module. There seems to be a lot happening over there in Altrincham with the signings that they've made. Like you said, the Chorley player they've just signed. Is it Josh Lundstrom, I believe, has signed for them? Is it from Crewe Alexander, if I believe, an experienced midfielder within the 92, the EFL. He's come down to the National League. He seems to be, a strong signing for them. Tom, what would your thoughts on Altrincham be then going into next season with the signings they've made? Obviously, losing Dan Mooney too to Southend.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because when a team announces they're going full time, immediately people go, right, well, they're going to be going for it. They've got to be pushing forward. But the thing is, the National League is primarily a full time division, and in terms of the signings that they have been able to bring in, I think, it is a case of that each signing I've looked at and gone, that's a good deal. There hasn't been one yet where you're thinking, right, that's, a couple of question marks attached to that. And I think Brookbank from Lancaster City, I've watched him a few times last season, and he always struck me as somebody who kind of needed, that full-time setting, that full-time training to really, reach their potential. So I think, there is a lot of optimism for Altrincham, and hopefully, because I do think they're a good club, hopefully it works for them. But it's always interesting to see what happens, because full-time does not necessarily mean automatically, that the results improved drastically.
Yeah. I remember when Halifax went full-time, it did take a couple of seasons, but we've seen now progression as a club, competing at the top end of the table. Like, our hopes are to get back to the Football League one day. And I'm sure that's something that Altrincham wanted to do. Obviously, they've never been in the Football League historically. They're probably trying to, for the first time, get to the Football League. That's probably the next step for them. Colin, what are your thoughts then on Altrincham heading into next season now with the signings they've made?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story, isn't it, really? And I think, that recruitment, and obviously the issue around, obviously, the manager's future, I think is absolutely significant, because the manager would have been part of having those conversations and making promises to these players. And so, therefore, there is that kind of emotional bond with the players coming in to say, look, I'm going to be here, we're going to work together full time. We're going to be on. And it's all about relationships, isn't it, really? It's about making sure that, if you're going to be working with someone absolutely every day on the training pitch, you want to be having people in the building that you're getting on with. And I think that was probably a massive pull, in terms of the decision that he's made to stay at Altrincham. It's going to be very interesting as well to see how that club progresses. I completely agree with what Tom's saying, that there can be this kind of stereotype of like, right, well, they obviously believe that they've got enough and they're gonna go for it. But I think, like I say, it's about being competitive. It's about being ambitious, and let's face it, ambition is something that's very appealing as well. And so I'm going to be watching that story incredibly closely.
Yeah, I think the only negative thing at Altrincham at the moment is the loss of Dan Mooney to Southend. They're another club that I want to talk a little bit about, Southend. They've sort of slipped down the division, haven't they, this season? Had quite a poor season for their standards, been in the National League for, I believe, the first time. What would you... I'll come to you first, Tom. What would Southend's expectations be heading into next season now, after the early signings that they've made, Dan Mooney being one of them, quite a good signing? However, in my opinion, I would say it's not to the level of what I've seen the likes of Stockport and Wrexham do in recent years. Would you agree?
Well, I think, this time last year, going into the new season, Southend, it was a really weird one because, I've got a few friends who cover the club, and it was kind of one of those where there was a lot of stuff happening off the pitch. There was a lot of issues where it was like, how badly is this going to affect it? Now, going into this campaign, there is at least a clear structure in place now, in terms of recruitment, in terms of the management team. And I think, they're definitely close to getting at least one pretty big name in, I would say, someone that, I would deem a big name anyway in terms of the National League. And I think the optimism for Southend is that kind of, I know the off the field matters have at least been resolved to a point, and now it's kind of more focusing on the pitch. And I think that'll be the big thing here is, if they can get a good start, they can fill out Roots Hall every week. It will be a tough place to go to for opposition players. And, it could be a very good season for Southend. But again, they probably, their recruitment right now, it's only a couple of players in. Obviously, there needs to be more happening. But, behind the scenes, that is certainly being worked on at the minute.
Mm-hmm. We did see towards the end of last season that Southend was becoming a sort of fortress, picking up a few points here and there. For example, beating Halifax at home 1-0 strong win for them there. Even going back to early on in the season, drawn with Wrexham. I think they did draw with Stockport, I believe, if I'm correct in saying that. They got some good wins and points here and there at Southend last season at home. And if they can sort of implement that and be slightly stronger at home this season and maybe improve the away form a little, because that was probably their big weakness of last season, they could be a strong side, couldn't they, heading into next season? Colin, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's about stability. They gave the impression of a club, I won't say in crisis, it wasn't as bad as that, but you could just tell that there was a lot of inconsistency around them. They relied a lot on loan players at the start of the season, really, as things settled down. And then you started to see them bringing their own players through, and you're starting to see their recruitment come through quite strongly now. I was very interested to see Noor Hussin, I think it was, who ended up there, who was a former Notts player who'd then gone down the leagues after we'd signed him from Crystal Palace, I think. A fantastic player, someone who sort of sits just in front of the back four, really good on the ball. So seeing him not only be able to be brought in as a permanent solution, but also seem to settle really well. So like I say, I think it's going to be really interesting to see now that their recruitment has sort of got in, stabilised the club. Obviously, I agree with you completely, towards the middle and end of the season, really got into their own stride. And I think they'll be a force to reckon with starting this season, certainly.
Would you go as far as playoffs, maybe?
I think so. I think they can do. And I think it goes back to, some of the clubs that have made it successfully into the playoffs and got out of this league is they shouldn't be scared of turnover. They shouldn't be scared of, of bringing new solutions in and, being in that kind of transformation stage of a club, and I think they could ride on that. Certainly. I think they probably need one, be interesting to see a few other names sort of coming in and really starting to see exactly where their intent is. But I think they've got the potential to go further, certainly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And Southend, historically our Football League side, and they will also be wanting to try get into the Football League. There's some other clubs that I'd like to talk a little bit about, the likes of York City, Gateshead, Dorking, Maidstone, the sides that have got promoted. We'll start with York City then. I'll come to you first, Tom. What would your expectations be for them next season? Like, they've already started doing the business quite early within the window, signing the likes of Scott Bowden, a proven striker at this level. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think, it was a really interesting campaign because, when John Askey took over, it just felt like they lost to Bradford Park Avenue near the end of January, and it really felt like it was just going to be one of those seasons, maybe plod along, try and do something in the FA Trophy, and just, moving on to the next campaign. Kingsley James went in as assistant, and it just felt like, things were, there was a bit of momentum building, but maybe it was a little bit too late in the day. And then all of a sudden, the way the National League North is, if a team can hit any momentum, all of a sudden they're climbing the table. And that's exactly what happened. And, that final against Boston United, that is how you get into a new stadium and, turn it into a fortress, because it was deafening, it really was. And I think the recruitment and kind of things that have happened behind the scenes right now, it has been a little bit of a slower, probably a little bit slower than fans would like, but Scott Bowden is a good start for that. He's someone who knows the league inside out, and someone that John Askey knows very well as well from the time at Macclesfield. So I think, there's certainly going to be some recruitment needed to be done there, because, they were pretty ruthless with the retained list. Certain players that I thought, they'll do well and they'll do okay in the National League. John Askey doesn't just want to be in the National League making up numbers. He's won this division before, and I don't think they'll be, aiming to win the National League, but I definitely think they'll be looking and thinking we can be one of them sides that near the end of it has got a chance of getting in the playoff places.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Scott Bowden, an experienced striker at this level. I think it's all about playing him within the right system. I know when he's been at Wrexham in the past and had the strongest of seasons there. We've seen the likes of Boreham Wood, Chesterfield. When he's played in the right system, he can be a clinical striker. York City, I think, will be a strong side next season. Colin, would you agree?
Yeah, we tend to play York an awful lot in pre-season at Notts, and so it's always interesting to kind of see them and see their progress. And it's fantastic to see these clubs that were established sort of league clubs, and we were used to seeing them quite regularly start to build up. And I obviously mentioned Boston as well there in terms of their climb. So yeah, I think so, and I think I completely agree. It's all about the system. It's all about addressing a certain style, having that certain style, and kind of building that. And like you say, I think the aggressive transfer policy that they've got really shows that they're determined to make this stick. They're not there to make up the numbers, that they are there to try and really sort of establish themselves at least as a National League club. And I think it goes back to that word again, momentum as well, doesn't it? That they're going to hopefully try and build on the momentum that they've gained through promotion and through moving forward through the leagues. And, it's a fantastic storyline, and one that I think everybody, with a memory of what they were as a club and how big they were as a club, that they want to see them progress further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's good from our point of view as well to have a bit of a proper non-league derby. It's something that we haven't had for a number of years. I think Guiseley were the last, and I think it was more Guiseley's point of view seeing us as their rivals, which we don't really want to talk too much about. But yeah, I think it's good to have York back in the league. They're getting good attendances too. I think it increases the National League's status, and the profile of the National League will increase. It's another big side that will add to the National League. And yeah, this is a topic for another day, but it is National League at this moment in time, not just the numbers, but the quality in play. It is probably just as strong, or maybe even stronger than the Football League. So I want to talk a bit about the likes of Gateshead, Maidstone and Dorking. Gateshead and Maidstone both been in the National League in the past. Tom, what are your expectations for them next season?
Well, it's going to be, for Gateshead, obviously, Macaulay Langstaff was a key player, a fantastic player for them. And, obviously Mike Williamson, there'll be real disappointment for Gateshead that what happened there, and, the release clause being activated. I think, as well with Mike Williamson, there has been interest from, I think I can say this, from 3 other clubs. There's been interest in him, and kind of, what happens there. But I think with Gateshead, the way that they went down previously into the National League North, from the outside in, it was absolutely terrible watching. I know somebody who was kind of trying to save the club, and watching what was happening there, it's so nice to see them return to the National League, and kind of, because, the way that they were relegated, it didn't sit right in terms of, the fans, the players, everyone there suffered because of stuff happening behind the scenes. And in terms of Maidstone, they're a team that I've always associated as, that they play decent football. They've got, a nice ground, and it's good to see them back, because, they're another team where they've got a manager who, they've trusted in the last couple of years. And it'll be interesting to just see, I know it's another Southern team, but they're a team I've been to a few times. I've always enjoyed a visit there.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, two sides that, have always been National League sides historically. Two sides that have got National League fan bases, that they're going to, be good sides in this division, and I'm sure they can have strong seasons next season. Gateshead, though, our side that I am a little fearful of next season, if I was a Gateshead fan, losing their main striker in Longstaff, 28 goals, I think he scored last season for Gateshead. I think they may struggle next season to cope with, the National League next season. However, there's always it's always very tight near the bottom of the league, and I'm sure if Gateshead could bring in the right players, I'm sure they could try and establish themselves at National League level. Same with Maidstone, they're got a good fan base. They've got a National League feel about them. I'm sure they can establish themselves in the National League next season. Now, a side that we haven't talked about making their debut, I believe, in the National League, and it is Dorking Wanderers. Now, Dorking from the National League South coming into the National League. Tom, how do you think they're going to do next season?
Well, I think first of all, it's just an incredible story, the rise in the last 20 years from them. And, Mark, their owner, manager, kind of the jack of all trades for Dorking. And, what they were able to do in the National League South was sign players that were just established National League South players. And, it wasn't a shock that when they gained promotion, all of a sudden, they were a very competitive team. This is where it'll be really interesting, because kind of, the difference from your step 3 to your step 2 in terms of finance, it isn't that big a difference between step 2 to step 1. And this is where it'll be really interesting to see just kind of what kind of player they are able to get in, because again, they've for 20 plus years, really, they've been a team that have always been going in, getting good players in, always been aiming to be going up. This will probably be the first time where they're going to be looking and thinking, right, let's try and establish ourselves, because if they can become an established National League side, for a few years, I think that would be deemed a success for them.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about Dorking is we have scenes like themselves who have the profile like themselves, like the likes of Havington and Waterlooville, likes of Weymouth, Kings, and those sort of sides. When they come to the National League, they do seem to struggle. And I think it would be a story if Dorking could stay up in the National League and, sustain a spot in the upcoming years and really establish themselves. However, I don't really know about their business. I know they've made a few signs, like Ryan Seeger's come to their club, but they're a side that I think may struggle next season. Colin, would you agree?
Yeah, I agree about the step completely. It could be a step too far, to be honest. But again, it also makes the National League fascinating that we've got these clubs that we've just talked about with these fantastic sort of credibility as either former league clubs or really sort of solid National League clubs. You need this extra narrative. You need this extra sort of element to it to make it fascinating. And of course, they're going to be dangerous because of that underdog kind of mentality, really, and that perception that they're going to have. And so I look forward to seeing them, and I think that's what makes them potentially dangerous. I do think that there's a lot more work to be done in terms of the recruitment. Although Seeger, like I say, is somebody who comes with a decent reputation. I've seen a few clips of him, for example, and I think a really good signing. So it could really work well for them. But it'd be interesting to see what other business they do to really sort of see what their intentions are and how well it's going to work, really.
They seem to be signing quite a lot of players, 3 signings. To be honest, I'll be totally honest here, I don't have too much info on the signings, which could be a good thing because when new players come to the National League, they may shock a few and sides may not know what to do against them. bit more on a negative note for these two clubs. Oldham and Scunthorpe, two established Football League sides. I think they're both making their debuts in the National League. I think Oldham's just so much more tragic in it when you think of them being in the Premier League in the past. But what would you be expecting from both of them? We'll start with Oldham then. Colin, what would you be expecting from them?
I think it's going to be bumpy. I mean, let's face it, I've been there, and there's plenty of other clubs that have come down from there. It's very hard to manage expectations. You're a big side, but also you're a side that you've got problems. You're overcoming problems off the field, and that can be a bit of a toxic mix, to be honest with you. I mean, obviously, when we went down, we had a new owner, and that was able to kind of, I don't know, create a kind of new broom idea that you go in again. Whereas obviously, if they don't sort out the complexity of things going off the field, there is this danger of having this instability in the back room, and then also sort of like the fans' expectations of just turning up and being able to win, and that's quite a shuddering realization when you don't turn up against these sides that sometimes you only know through reputation. You've never been to their ground before or whatever, and suddenly you're 1 or 2 goals down, and it can be a bit of a shuddering realization. I think, like I say, there's a lot of work to be done. I had a little look at their kind of data and stats and stuff in terms of League Two, and it wasn't particularly pretty. I do think that they've got that ability to press, which I think is so important in the National League. But obviously, when you're starting to bring in new players and stuff, obviously they've got to establish a new routine. I think they've got to start wondering where the goals are coming from. Where are they going to, who is going to be that outlet really? Just the same with every club in the National League really, is that the ones who get out are the ones who've got a proven goal scorer and someone who can really be relied on to do that. And so that the recruitment's going to be key to them. But I worry that the first couple of months are certainly going to be bumpy.
Yeah, 2 things I'd like to pick out with Oldham. The signing of Liam Hogan, he's left Stockport to join Oldham. Quite an interesting move from his perspective, one that I could see coming when you think of Stockport getting promoted. I think he wants to stay at the National League level. I think this could be a genius signing for Oldham, if I'm totally honest. An experienced centre-half at this level. Yes, he does have a mistake in him, but if he can establish himself in this Oldham team alongside a strong centre-half, I'm sure, defensively, Oldham could be strong next season. Another thing I'd like to pick out as well, Zach Durnley, he was actually on loan at Halifax last season from Oldham when they were in the Football League. He seemed to be a striker that didn't particularly get too much game time at Halifax, but when he did, he seemed to have an impact. For example, he scored 3 goals in his time, I believe, in 11 appearances, I think. However, I think the majority of those were coming off from the bench. He is a clinical striker, and I can sort of see him, if he's getting the game time at Oldham, he could be that outlet for Oldham next season. Tom, would you agree?
Well, I think, first of all, it's what's really interesting with Oldham is obviously, John Sheridan, he's a manager who likes his experienced heads. And I think Liam Hogan, fits that perfectly. Chris Porter as well joining, he was at the club, I think, in 2007. He's rejoined. And it's kind of, I think they're going to be 2 kind of staple signings for them. And now it'll be a case of, in terms of up front, who can be the partner for Chris Porter, the way they've been talking. And, that very well could be the case. But again, it is that thing of, it is such a shame the amount of teams that come into the National League, they seem to always come in with issues off the pitch. And, you look at Grimsby Town last year, they were able to get new ownership. All of a sudden, that feel-good factor's there. Whether that can happen for either Oldham or Scunthorpe in the next few months, that could be, the difference between what happens going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Scunthorpe, another side that I'd like to talk about too. Now, I think when I'm looking at Scunthorpe, I think it's a little bit more negative when I'm looking at them at this moment in time. There aren't too many signings that I've really heard of. There aren't many players that I'm too sure about doing well in this division. Tom, what would your thoughts on Scunthorpe be next season?
Well, they've signed Andrew Boyce, who, is an established National League defender, did a very good job at Eastleigh for 5 years. And, he only left the club because he wanted to move back up north. So, in terms of a starting point, they've got 1 good player through the door. Again, ownership issues, there were fan protests at the end of it. Keith Hill, is someone who hasn't got too much experience in terms of the National League. And I think that's one thing that, I find interesting is the managers that maybe, are primarily in League One and League Two that then dip the toe into the National League. There is a difference in terms of player recruitment, in terms of contacts, and that could be a point where, we'll see what Keith Hill can achieve. But right now, obviously for Scunthorpe, there's a lot of work to be done both on and off the pitch.
Yeah. Colin, what are your thoughts?
There's a player I'm particularly interested in. So, like I say, looking at recruitment last season, Tyrone O'Neill, who I think was released by Middlesbrough, I saw as kind of a great understudy for someone like Kyle Wootton, for example, a really tall centre forward kind of target man, but also mobile, capable of using the ball at his feet. He started well, or he seemed to start well at Scunthorpe, and then fell out of favour. Ended up at Darlington, I think, on loan, where he'd been on loan previously, I think about 3 or 4 times. And so, like I say, he's got another year on his contract. So it'd be interesting to see whether that experience out in the National League North is going to be sort of brought into National League level, and he's going to kind of lead them. Because obviously, like I say, I think it's going to be interesting about how much money that they've got to spend, I mean, and like I say, from a purely selfish point of view, I'm delighted that obviously the spending power of Stockport's gone out of this division, for example, and we're replacing them with clubs who, shall we say, are not quite as financially furnished as that. But like I say, I agree with what Tom was saying. If they're able to kind of stabilise, if they're able to perhaps bring in a new owner or find another funding stream, really, then they might be able to go for it again. If not, again, it could be quite a bit of a tight season for them.
Solihull Moors then, playoffs devastation for them. There's a lot of rumours within specific players for them. One that sort of shocks me, I know there's been a lot of rumours for them for a number of years now. I remember Manchester City looking at this player, Kyle Hudlin. Now, I think there's a lot of negativity on the rumours that are going around with Kyle. I think a lot of people are thinking he's initially, I think I've seen quotes saying he's garbage from certain people. Kyle Hudlin, 5 goals I think he's scored this season for the Moors. But I think the factor that makes him attractable from Football League sides is his size. 6'9", seemed to be strong in the playoffs as well. Hudlin for Solihull, which will also, add media attention as well from Football League sides. And they're not just your League Two, even League One sides. You're getting the likes of Huddersfield Town looking at Kyle Hudlin, a side that, I'm well aware of with Halifax being close to Huddersfield. What do you think of this move then? I'll come to you then, Tom, on Kyle potentially moving to Huddersfield.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, I watched him play as a trialist a few years ago for a National League North team, and then he kind of went off the radar a bit, and then he ended up at Solihull United, and it just felt like, really wasn't sure what was going to happen to him, and then he makes the move to Solihull Moors, and then I think, one or two of the links I think are just a case of he's very tall, we're just going to say that some club wants him. And, I think that is how certain, football Twitter accounts kind of do it. They just go, right, that player has a bit of a name for themselves. I'm going to say that this club really wants him. Now, in terms of the Huddersfield Town link, there is fact with that. And if he can, make the move into the Football League, I think he is someone who, with, the right training, he's certainly going to be somebody who can, he can be utilised in a very effective way because, I stood next to him once and, I really was having to look up just to try and see him because he is, he's an absolute giant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talked about training, something that I'd like to pick out there. Huddersfield have the development of the B team, which is initially a reserve squad who play against like Manchester City under-23s. I know that's something that's quite popular at Huddersfield, how they develop players. Not making this into an EFL podcast now, with the likes of Lewis O'Brien, Sober Thomas. Players like this have all come through the B team at Huddersfield, and I think there's a lot of Huddersfield fans that I know have been saying Kyle Hudlin would be great for them with the playing style that they do, developing him through the B team into, the first team. could be good for Huddersfield long term. Colin, what are your thoughts then on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm a massive fan of what Huddersfield do. Again, without wanting to bring in the EFL too much, but yeah, I'm a massive fan of what they do in terms of their recruitment and bringing players through. And it's just that kind of creativity and that ingenuity of dealing with a very difficult kind of youth background. They were having players taken from their academy at their kind of bigger local clubs, and so they did something different. So credit to them. But going back to Hudlin, I think. I love the fact they did the Peter Crouch robot, for example. I thought that was quite significant in terms of the goal. But I think also, you're right. There is this kind of ability, or there is this kind of tendency to stereotype him as just right. He's a big lad. We're going to stick him up front, and we're going to just bash it up to him. And I think, there is this potential to develop him as a player. I think also, tactically. That you create space by bringing a player on like this. If you bring him on, you're immediately causing concern. And I think it was obviously very significant. The last goal that Grimsby scored was, a very sort of similar sort of thing where you saw the danger of sending somebody up and sending a defensive line back and people panicking in the box. That's what Hudlin can do in the opposite end. You send him up front, you send him on late, you send him up to really sort of take the attention away of particularly centre-halves who are likely to mock, and then you create space for other players. So I can see why clubs are looking to recruit him. I just hope wherever he goes, they develop him as a much more rounded player. Otherwise, he is going to be a little bit more one-dimensional. And obviously, I'm sure he's probably thinking about his next move very carefully about who's going to best develop him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have seen glimpses of what Carl Hudlin can do, not just with his height, with his feet as well. I think against Chesterfield, I think he put the ball the other way and went around. If you get what I mean by that skill, there's other players as well, like Joel Sabara, Andrew Dallas, linked with moves. This Joel Sabara to Wrexham move has been going on since January, I believe, and I think everyone's saying it's inevitable that it's actually going to happen. Well, people were saying that in January. Could you see? I'll come to you, Tom. Could you see him leaving?
Well, I think he's had a fantastic season, and he's somebody who, if you are looking at trying to gain promotion from the National League, signing a player who has been a key player in the National League can only be a good thing. And for Solihull, in terms of their ambitions, because their ambitions, are going to remain that they want to gain promotion. Neil Ardley, for him now it's 2 very disappointing playoff final defeats in a couple of years. Sorry, Colin, for bringing that up, but I do have to. But, I think the big thing for me is, if they can keep Zvara and, Andrew Dallas, I couldn't believe just kind of when it was announced, when it was announced that he was leaving Cambridge, I was really expecting one of the, the absolute big National League clubs, to be going for him because of what he'd done at Weymouth, and for Solihull to get him, and obviously he's under contract for next season. They're going to be able to get a premium for him if they want him to go. And obviously, with the ambitions they've got, Sabara and Dallas staying, I think are 2 key moves for them.
Yeah. It's got 6 goals, I think he'd scored halfway through the season to end it on something like 18, I think, Andrew Dallas. But yeah, the Andrew Dallas and Sabara partnership was deadly. And I think next season for Solihull, I think it is crucial that they do keep those 2 players. And if they can get a decent fee for the likes of Hudlin, no, I wouldn't be upset to leave him go. I think something like 150 grand a week to a football league side would be perfect for them. I'm sure they could use that money to add to the team in the central midfield and defensive areas too. Now we're almost out of time. I just want to quickly talk a bit about Halifax Town. There's been a lot of things happening surrounding Halifax at the moment. The likes of Billy Waters has left to join Pete Wild at Barrow, Tom Bradbury's left, the captain Niles Mars left. Like, you two, as neutrals, not knowing too much about Halifax, them as to the extent that I do, what would your thoughts going on Halifax into next season, honestly? Tom, I'll come to you first.
Well, first of all, the departure of Pete Wild is a clear blow, and during the season there was interest in Pete Wild from other clubs. Pete Wild, was incredibly professional about all this and kind of immediately said, I am not leaving, I'm staying, I'm seeing the job out till the end of the season. when that game against Chesterfield ended the way it did, it became pretty clear that there was a North East club that was, going to be going for him. And, in the end, Barrow are the team that get him. And, obviously there's a lot of change coming with that. Whether this season, ends up being maybe one of transition, with a manager, though, who, does know the club, has, had success with Pete Wild, obviously. And it'll be interesting to see now what their recruitment is, because, to me, the biggest loss has to be mine, because he, has been the linchpin, really, the captain, someone who had that role. And you could see the communication and the leadership that he had on the pitch every game. So it's going to be very tough to replace, the likes of him. But, let's see what happens.
Yeah, we always do have this transitional period every season. I think I was talking to Colin before we started the podcast about this. We have kept certain players like Matty Walton, Jesse Debb was signed a new deal. My favourite centre-half within the club, and hopefully he's just signing the deal so the club get a fee for him if a club do come in. Kieran Spence, if we can keep the spine of the team, the likes of Kieran Green, I'm sure we will compete next season. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see who we sign. Colin, what are your thoughts then on Halifax?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I felt for you when the news sort of came through, and it's sort of the spine of the team starting to disappear. I mean, I quite like Bradbury myself in terms of the player, and I think he's the type of player that Notts could do within that kind of central three to really kind of shore it up a little bit. So it'll be interesting where he ends up. But I think you've also got to remain positive about this as well. Halifax, in terms of a club, are a great advert for any player who really wants to launch their career. If you think about where these players are going to end up going, they're going to be really good destinations. And if I'm a young player coming out of a big academy, really wanting to kind of prove myself, really wanting to kind of develop my career, or maybe moving through the leagues going forward, you can't think of a better destination, really. And I think you've just got to hope that the recruitment team or the team that's brought these options in, who have got so much interest in them, are still in the building. And if they are still in the building, then like I say, you've just got to put your faith in that they're going to be able to find alternative options. And let's face it, they are an attractive option, because again, if I'm a player looking to move my career on, I can't think of any better club to do it in, really.
Mm-hmm. It is quite a good trait that Halifax have of developing players to go on to the Football League. Even in recent years, here, King, Byrne have all gone to play in the Football League. King's actually at Chesterfield. But you've also got going a few years back now to the likes of Jamie Vardy, Lee Gregory have played for the club. They've played the Championship, the Premiership even. David Brooks has been on loan at Halifax. There's a lot of players that come to Halifax and have successful careers after leaving the club to pursue their future in the Football League. Like some Matty Pearson as well at Huddersfield. Yeah, I'm going to be interested by the business that we do. I think centre halves, we've always been quite strong defensively in the National League. I think we can bring in a couple of centre halves that are strong, like some Bird, who was obviously at Kings Lynn, went on loan to us. I think we may be looking to try sign him on a permanent deal. I think the one that I'm very disappointed with is the Billy Waters loss. 18 goals. That's very hard to replace, but hopefully we can find a gem out there. I think that more or less concludes tonight's podcast. Cheers to Tom and Colin for coming on for the first edition of the Talking National League podcast. Cheers for coming on, lads.
No worries.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Okay, right. So if you want to catch next week's episode, it will be the same time, 7 p.m. on Thursday. We've got some special guests coming on for next week too. Go and follow our partners on all the social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at Non-League Bible. Cheers for them for partnering with the podcast. Once again, lads, I appreciate you coming on, and thank you to everyone that's tuned into tonight's podcast. Please leave a like and subscribe, and try and retweet it if you are watching on Twitter. Let's try and get this podcast out to as many National League fans out there as possible. Cheers, lads, for coming on tonight. Cheers.